Hi, I'm Kimberly, and welcome to As I've Seen It. Last weekend, comedian Dave Chappelle hosted Saturday Night Live and showed us all why he is amazingly funny. In the last couple of minutes of his monologue, he got serious on us, and he related the fact that Frederick Douglass was the first African American officially invited to the White House to meet with Abraham Lincoln. In fact, Frederick Douglass actually went to the White House a couple of times. And then he said, to the best of his knowledge, the next African American invited to the White House was invited by Roosevelt. And he spoke of the fact that Roosevelt got so much flack in the press for having invited this man that he swore to never have another N-word in the White House. I knew about the Frederick Douglass thing, and actually when he mentioned the Roosevelt story, I knew exactly who he was talking about, who the black man was, and I also knew which Roosevelt. There were several people who thought he was talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Oh, no. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president number 32, I believe. He's the only president elected to 4 terms, 1932, 36, 40, and 44. And Roosevelt is the president, this Roosevelt is the president who shepherded the U.S. through the Great Depression and through World War II. But that's not the Roosevelt that Dave Chappelle was talking about. He was talking about Teddy Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was president number 26, I believe. He was a cousin of the other Roosevelt, but Teddy served from 1901 to 1909. And, you know, Teddy's famous for having his head carved into Mount Rushmore with Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. Teddy's also famous for having been a member of the Rough Riders. He's known for his hunting skills. He gave us the Museum of Natural History in New York, and I'll come back and talk about that photo in a little while. And we call them teddy bears because of Teddy. Now, even in 1901, it wouldn't have been a big deal to see an African American at the White House. After all, slaves helped build the White House. There have been African Americans coming in and out of the White House since day one. Actually, slaves built the White House twice, because in that war that most Americans don't remember, the War of 1812, the British came darn close to taking their colonies back. And they occupied Washington for like a day, and one of the things they did was burn down the White House. So slaves probably built it the second time too. I digress. So what was the big deal about Teddy inviting this guy to the White House? Well, for the first time in history, a black man wasn't invited to the White House for a meeting. He was invited for dinner. That's why everybody lost it. Teddy invited a black man to sit down with him for dinner, and he got so much flack. It was so ugly. Not only were there ugly racist cartoons drawn about Teddy and this black man, they drew nasty racist cartoons about Mrs. Roosevelt and black men. It was unprecedented. So let's take a look at the time in which Teddy was president. 1901. First of all, Teddy wasn't even supposed to be president. Teddy was vice president and became president when McKinley was assassinated. And so here's Teddy, president in 1901, at a time when America is becoming more of an empire. This was right around the time that America acquired the Philippines. Yeah, acquired somebody else's country through a treaty with Spain. There'd been the Spanish-American War, treaty with Spain, we get the Philippines. So America was becoming an empire. This was also about the time that Rudyard Kipling's poem, White Man's Burden, hit the presses. And in this poem, you can see pretty much the imperialists' attitude of the time, which was, it is the burden of the white man to drag all of these brown and black people, kicking and screaming if necessary, into the civilized world. That it is the duty of white men to rescue these savages from their, native barbarism, whatever. Yeah, shocking to think about this a century later. Don't get it twisted. Teddy was not some great progressive. He definitely considered himself and all white people superior to all brown and black people. Let's go back to that statue that's sitting in front of the Museum of Natural History in New York. Here's Teddy astride his horse, and look who's standing on either side of him. There's a Native American on one side, and there's an African man on the other. Yeah, that was the prevailing attitude at the time. So for Teddy to have sat down for dinner with this man and raised him to the same social level, to have declared by a dinner invitation social equality, ooh, this did not sit well. So who is this guy that Teddy was willing to risk all of this for? Well, this was Booker T. Washington. And Mr. Washington, by that time, had been the head of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama for, a good 20 years. At the time of its founding, the Tuskegee Institute was there to provide what was called an industrial education. With Tuskegee, it was Mr. Washington's goal to prepare African Americans to achieve economic prosperity in the best way that they could. His school trained teachers. His school trained craftsmen, skilled laborers, and they also taught people the best and most modern farming techniques. What they didn't do was teach a liberal arts education. Mr. Washington made a speech in 1895 at the Atlanta Exposition. And in his Atlanta Exposition speech, Mr. Washington instructed African Americans to stop pursuing civil rights, to stop pursuing their right to vote, which was guaranteed by the 15th Amendment, and to embrace segregation in some ways. He basically said we should stay in the South, work where we are to build our community's economic resources. We should build ourselves up and stop striving to be equal to whites. This was welcome news to white Southerners. And of course, that brought donations and accolades and all sorts of other things to him. And he basically became the preeminent African American leader and or scholar. This is not a position anybody gets voted into. Other people decide, oh, you must be the leader of the African American community. So that is why by 1901, he was so famous. And Mr. Washington was a powerful dude. Having trained so many teachers at Tuskegee, he also set up a network of schools. He controlled a network of black newspapers as well. And with this power, he also managed to quash the opinions of those who disagreed with him. So who disagreed with him? Well, around the same time, 1895 or so, there came a whole new generation of African American intellectuals. Top of the list, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois.